Hi guys, so today's video is going to look at the poem Out Out by Robert Frost. Alright, so before we go into looking at the poem in detail, we want to think about the title of the poem. So the title is quite short and it's just the words Out Out. So I want you to think about what images or sounds does the title bring to mind? What tone would you expect maybe that those words would be said in? And why do you think the poet has ended this title with a dash? Alright, so the objective today is just to understand the language and storyline of the poem. We want to connect the themes of the poem with some information we might have about Frost's life. We might want to examine the language of the poem in depth and then explore deeper meaning to the poem. Okay, if we go back to that title then, Out Out. Right, the imagery that we might come across here, and we're going to link the three questions here together. So the tone, we'd expect one of two tones here. We might expect a tone, a demanding a command coming across here. Someone being thrown out of somewhere. So out, out, sending someone out. Okay, and then followed by that dash. Okay, and that's linked to question 3. That dash representing a pause and a silence after it. Out, out. Okay, we could see a demand there. However, we might also see this out, out. Okay, and the repetition of it. If it was a command or a demand, you might expect just out. It might end there. Out, out. It could bring to mind the idea of something being extinguished, something going out, so a fire going out, or a candle perhaps going out. Some of you may be actually aware of the reference being made here, and that is the idea that it's going for, the idea of that candle being extinguished. Now, if you didn't realize if you weren't aware of the reference, there is a clue here that may have told you so, and that is those speech marks around the out, out. Tells us that it is a quote from somewhere. Okay, and we're going to look at that in a few minutes. Okay, so to start off with, we'll just read through the poem. The poem, Out Out. The buzzsaw snarled and rattled in the yard, and made dust and dropped stove-length sticks of wood, sweet-scented stuff when the breeze threw across it. And from there, those that lifted eyes could count 5 mountain ranges, one behind the other, under the sunset far into Vermont. And the saw snarled and rattled, as it ran light or had to bear a load. And nothing happened. Day was all but done. Call it a day, I wish they might have said, to please the boy by giving him the half hour that a boy counts so much when saved from work. His sister stood beside him in her apron to tell them supper. At the word, the saw, as if to prove saws knew what supper meant, leaped out of the boy's hand, or seemed to leap. He must have given the hand. However it was, neither refused a meeting, but the hand. The boy's first outcry was a rueful laugh as he swung towards them, holding up the hand, half an appeal, but half as if to keep the life from spilling. Then the boy saw all. Since he was old enough to know, big boy doing a man's work, though a child at heart, he saw all spoiled. Don't let them cut my hand off. The doctor, when he comes, don't let him, sister. So, but the hand was already gone. The doctor put him in the dark of ether. He lay and puffed his lips out with his breath. And then, the watcher at his pulse took fright. No one believed. They listened at his heart. Little, less, nothing. And that ended it. No more to build on there, and they, since they were not the one dead, turned to their affairs. Okay, so it's quite a shocking and extreme poem in terms of some of the imagery, in terms of what's going on there. So the poem is telling us about a fatal accident involving a young boy. I want you to think about first reactions. What was the poem what you expected it to be? What do you think or feel about this poem? What reaction is it getting from you? And the poem is based on a real story. It is inspired by a real life event. Why do you think Frost might have written this poem? Okay, so I'm going to flick back to the poem in a second. I want you to pause the video and just read through the poem 2 or 3 times. It's really important to have a very good familiarity with these poems before going into deep analysis. So read through 2 or 3 times and think about those questions. Okay, so we look at those questions. What was the poem what you expected? Most people, most time, they will say that no, this poem is not usually what you would expect from poetry. Frost while he is very realistic through his poems, when we think about poetry and Frost poems, there's a love of nature and things in it. This poem is much more industrial and shocking and cruel and visceral in the imagery. Okay? It's supposed to shock, that's by design. Okay? Most people will feel somewhat uncomfortable by this poem, and the imagery and the sounds within the poem that Frost is using are designed to make that discomfort. You're supposed to feel uncomfortable when reading this, and you're supposed to feel shocked and appalled and probably saddened by the poem. And there's a number of different reasons why Frost might have written the poem. We will look at a few of them there, but one aspect we have to take into account is that it is written as a dedication to a young boy who lost his life in a farm accident. So I'm just flick back to the poem really quickly and just run through what actually happens in the poem just to make sure everyone's clear. So what's going on is there is a young boy working on a farm. Okay, he's not in school, he seems quite young, but he's been forced into doing adult work, and the work he's doing is quite dangerous. He's using a buzz saw. Okay, so it's a mechanical saw that he's using, and as he's been working all day. It's quite a beautiful imagery in the background Frost links to, which we'll get into in a little while. But his sister calls him in for supper, and when she calls him, he loses control of the saw, and the saw leaps out of his hand and cuts his hand off. So he reacts to this obviously in a state of shock, but he turns to his sister and he's holding up the wrist or hands that's spilling blood, and he asks his sister, please don't let the doctor cut off my hand, even though really they all know straight away that the hand is gone, and due to where they are, that the boy is going to die. And then at the end of the poem we see how the doctors come out, they give him some pain relief, and then he dies at the end of the poem. Okay, but there's a number of things. It's a very tragic poem. There's a number of other lessons that we can take from the poem. So the first thing I want to look at is the title, Out, Out. So this title is an allusion to Shakespeare's Macbeth. So it's a speech from Act 5, Scene 5 of Macbeth, which I'll show you in a second. And basically the speech is focusing on how life is both brief and meaningless. So in the play, Macbeth, who was King of Scotland at the time, his wife has just committed suicide, but Macbeth is in the middle of a war, and when he hears that his wife has committed suicide, you'll see in the speech in a second, he says she should have died hereafter, that he would have had time to grieve for her at a different stage. He doesn't have time for this now, and he very much just disregards her death. Okay? And he puts it down to this idea that, oh well, life is meaningless, and it's to do with the cruelty and things. But we're not going to go into big analysis of Macbeth here. What you need to take from this is that we're looking at the briefness and meaninglessness of life. There's also an idea here that in the play Macbeth is a king, and by using this title, maybe, and the out in the play is referring to Lady Macbeth, the Queen. Is possibly that Frost is trying to draw parallels between the king and queen, between royalty and this poor boy working class boy working on a farm in rural America, and that really that the meaning of life is common no matter what background you're from. So we look just really quickly. Again, this is not a video on Macbeth, so we'll just very quickly go through this speech. So the speech is from Act 5, Scene 5, and Macbeth. This is when Macbeth has just heard that his wife has just died. So Macbeth says, "She should have died hereafter. There would have been time for such a word. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools to wait dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." So what Macbeth is saying here is, he says, out, out, brief candle, that is the life of his wife, Lady Macbeth, and he's saying that life is just something that passes. You know, we come, we strut and fret, we spend our hour on the stage of life. It is just a tale, it's just a story told by foolish people. It's full of drama, but at the end it means nothing. Okay, so by using this title of Out Out, it's a very clear reference to anyone who knows Macbeth. They will instantly know Out Out, this quote, Out Out, brief candle. And so we're immediately drawn to this idea of the meaninglessness of life. So what is Frost trying to imply or trying to tell us about the boy's life through that reference? Okay, so we'll go into the poem in a few different sections. So we look at lines 1 to 9 first. The buzz saw snarled and rattled in the yard, and made dust and dropped stove-length sticks of wood, sweet-scented stuff when the breeze drew across it. And from there those that lifted eyes could count 5 mountain ranges, one behind the other, under the sunset far into Vermont. And the saw snarled and rattled, as it ran light or had to bear a load. And nothing happened. Day was all but done. So a few questions just to think about in this section of the poem. Why do you think the poet has drawn on the sounds which saw so much in the opening lines? We keeps going back to snarled and rattled, snarled and rattled, snarled and rattled. He says it 3 times. What kind of area is the poem set in? Is this important for us to understand? And nothing happened. Day was all but done. Why has the poet told us that nothing has happened here? Okay, so I'm going to suggest just pause the video here for a few seconds. Think about each of those questions yourself, and come up with answers to those questions. You know, it's much better for you to come up with answers yourselves and then just be reliant on someone telling you answers. So the sound of the saw that he keeps drawing on is snarled and rattled. Okay, there's a lot of onomatopoeia going on throughout this poem, and that is trying to draw us into a sensory experience of what's going on. He wants us to hear the sound of the snarling and the rattling saw. That also brings in a sense of danger to it. Okay, you know, he's not safe being around this saw that's snarling and rattling all the time. Okay, and this section is also, we can see the description of where he is based. So he talks about if from there those that lifted eyes could count 5 mountain ranges, one behind the other. He's talking about the rural landscapes. So he's trying to bring us into this rural world that Frost loves so much and has such a good experience of. But the overwhelming sense we're getting here is the sound of the saw. It is overriding the beauty of the nature around it. And that final line in this section, and nothing happened, day was all but done. What the poet's telling us here is that the day is being eventless, but it's all but done. He's just a lot of tension coming here. Okay, he's building up with the sound of this dangerous saw, and then all but done. We're waiting for something to happen, and that is the tragic event that's about to come across. The boy losing his hand. So if we look just at some quick notes on this, the poem opens with an onomatopoeic and animalistic sounds which foreshadow the brutal and visceral images that we're going to follow. Okay, so as soon as we start reading this poem with the snarling and the rattling, we expect we're being brought into a world of danger where something bad is going to happen. And the idea of destruction continues in the second line with dust and dropped wood and mention of the stove, which brings in the image of the fire burning. Okay, there's a lot of plosive sounds going on here as well. Okay, so with the dark sound, with the sound of the snarling and the animalistic rattle. Okay, and then with the drop, the dust, and the harshness of this world, and everything's very definite. There's a beautiful description of the landscape, and yet the sibilance gives an uneasy feeling to the surroundings that are being described. So sweet scented stuff. Okay, it's too sweet to be good. It's an overriding sweetness here. So, and that again is leading into foreshadowing something dark coming up later on. The repetition in describing the sound of saw emphasizes the sound. It pervades our entire experience of this poem is framed by the sound of the saw, and then that is it's established with the sound of the saw, and that's going to be contrasted with the silence at the end. Okay, we come from somewhere that's very loud and vicious sounds, through the tragic event into a world of complete silence. And then the poet uses active verbs. There's a lot going on here, okay? Just the saw is acting, it's snarling, it's doing a lot, okay? And this creates kind of undisturbing, unsettling noise. Too much going on within this place where we should expect calmness and peace in a rural landscape. There's a lot going on that's quite unsettling to us as readers. If we move on then to lines 10 to 18. Call it a day, I wish they might have said, to please the boy by giving him the half hour. Did the boy count so much when saved from work? His sister stood beside him in her apron to tell them supper. At the word, the saw, as if to prove saws knew what supper meant, leaped out of the boy's hand, or seemed to leap. He must have given a hand. However it was, neither refused the meeting, but the hand. So the question is here, that a boy counts so much when saved from work, but there's an incredibly emotional line, there's a lot coming across. It's a very emotional poem, really. Do you agree that that's an emotional line? Why do you think it's an emotional line, or why do you disagree and think it's not an emotional line? And what is the effect of creating short sentences with the exclamation mark, but the hand? Why is that such a short sentence with the exclamation mark? So I'm going to suggest just pause here for 2 minutes and think about those questions. Okay, so that line, that a boy counts so much when saved from work, really why it might be considered so emotional is because it gives us the image of what this boy should be doing, and the innocence of the life he should be experiencing, and shows us that what's going on here with him working is completely unnatural, and this event that happens in the end of these lines is avoidable. Okay, if there's something wrong, that the boy was even in a situation that this could happen. Right, so it's a huge. You can think about it as I personally find there's a huge amount of emotion in that, and it gives a certain childish. It shows the innocence and childishness of the boy. The effect of the short sentence then with the exclamation mark, but the hand. Okay, it's an immediacy. Okay, there's no escaping this. Right, neither refused the meeting. It doesn't matter how this happened. It's irrelevant. The hand, it's gone. It's been cut off. The event has happened. And it's the shock, it's the suddenness of what's gone on. It's so quick, and yet it's so definite, and it's going to have such an impact. It's the end of the boy's life in such a quick instant. Okay, so a few annotations going on here. So as typical, the tone and language are very much natural, conversational. Call it a day, I wish they might have said. Very conversational, natural way of speaking. We introduce the boy in these lines. The speaker tells us that he wishes the boy had been told to stop work and given a free hour or free half hour. If that had happened, if he had been given the time to be a child at the end of the day, he wouldn't have lost his hand, he wouldn't have died. Attention is drawn to the innocence and how much children enjoy time for freedom. So a simple kindness of giving the child a childhood, allowing him to be a child, could have saved his life. Okay, so all these hypothetical situations make us really rethink what's going on here. Again, our attention is drawn when he talks about supper, okay, and this excitement at the end of the day. Right, this is trying to emphasise the childishness, and this draws on our empathy. This would be a very different poem if it was an adult that just happened. It was still tragic, but the tragedy, the deepness of this tragedy is emphasised by the fact that this is a child who should not have had to do this work. The saw is personified. It is the villain. It's attacking the boy. Okay, so you definitely should be talking about that. That the saw is animalistic with the snarling, okay, and the rattling, and then it's personified here that it leaps at him. It's attacking him. Okay, but neither refused the meeting. The boy never stood a chance here. Okay, once he lost control of the saw, that was the end of it. Okay, so moving on then, lines 19 to 27. The boy's first outcry was a rueful laugh as he swung towards them holding up the hand, half an appeal but half as if to keep the life from spilling. Then the boy saw all. Since he was old enough to know, big boy doing a man's work, though a child at heart, he saw all spoiled. Don't let him cut my hand off. The doctor, when he comes, don't let him, sister. So, but the hand was all gone already. So a few questions to think about here. What images in this section stand out to you most vividly? What makes this image so effective? How would you describe the tone of the speaker in the section? Which lines make this most clear? So again, I'm going to suggest just pause the video here for a second and think about those questions. Okay, so the imagery that's probably standing out to most people here is the image of the boy holding up the hand and the desperation of it. You might also have drawn on the image of him crying out to his sister and the desperation. Don't let him do this. You know, the boy knows. We've been told. The boy sees it all. Okay, he understands what's happened and the gravity of the situation, and the fact he probably knows that he's going to die because of this. But he may not. You know, he's a young child. He looks to his sister for help, and this just becomes all the more heart-wrenching in the fact that we know, and he probably knows, that the sister can't do anything. He's a child desperate to stay alive. There is that speech there at the end, the desperation, the naivety of the boy, and the repetition of "don't let him," and the sister calling out to his sister. All of that adds into making this more and more heart-wrenching for us. How would describe the tone? We would say he is resigned. He is deeply, deeply saddened, and almost but accepting of the boy's death, and almost already grieving because he knows the inevitability of what's about to happen to the boy. So this section, the reason we've taken that as a section is that it focuses on the boy's reaction to the accident. Okay, so the rueful laugh may suggest a humorous acceptance. Okay. It's a very dark humour possibly going on here, but that is something that humans often do in the most terrible of times. First immediate reaction is a laugh. But it implies the boy knows what the outcome of the accident will be. He knows he's going to die, and it could also represent a shock. He has no other way of reacting. How else can you react to your immediate death? The boy holds up his hand half in appeal, but half as if to keep the light from spilling. We understand that we know, and he knows, that this is a useless action. He's not going to do anything, but it just highlights the desperateness, and that he will do anything he can to save himself, as is natural. But what's happened can't be undone. There's a huge amount of sarcasm and a huge amount of bitterness in this and anger in this line, "Big boy doing a man's work." The words reminiscent of how he might speak to a toddler, saying, "Oh, big boy," but even though the boy is old enough to know that what's about to happen to him, he's not old enough to be doing this work. He shouldn't have to do this work. And so there is a social critique to a certain extent here about why the child is being forced to do the work that he really shouldn't have to do. The boy understands that he is spoiled, and that no matter what he does, he's going to be useless, even if he does survive this, which he knows he won't. A child without a hand on a farm in New England, he's useless essentially. He can't work. His life has changed forever, even if he did possibly survive it. So the greatest hope is for a life where he's completely changed. And his appeal not to have the doctor cut off his hand are desperate and hopeless. And the hand was gone already. The finality of this line emphasised the profound effect of his actions and a hint that the boy cannot come back from this. And then finally, to finish off, the doctor put him in the dark of ether. He lay and puffed his lips out with his breath, and then the watcher at his pulse took fright. No one believed. They listened at his heart. Little, less, nothing, and that ended it. No more to build on there, and they, since they were not the one dead, turned to their affairs. So how do these lines affect us as readers? What emotion does the poet draw out? How does he do this? Why do you think the poet has made the poem so emotional? And what do you think the poet wants us to take away from this piece of work? So again, pause here and think about the poem a little bit more, and come up with your own answers to those questions. Alright, so the effect of these lines is that we're going to be deeply, deeply saddened by this, and deeply, upset, by what's happened to the boy here. The emotion is drawing out our grief and our sense of indignation somewhat, or just a deep sadness from us. And he does this by in a number of ways. So we have the innocence of the child, which has been emphasised throughout the poem. There's also the silence within here. There is a natural call to our hearts through the use of silence within and the beat within these lines. Alright, so the little, less, nothing particular, that stands out because you can kind of hear the heartbeat. This is the watcher at the heart, or the watcher at the pulse, listening, and we can hear the heart dying and losing power. The little, less, nothing made. Each of them, just the beat there representing the beat of the heart, which is dying. Probably for the second question, he makes it so emotional because it's based on a real event. He is paying tribute to a boy that to a real event, a real life boy, and he wants to make a true tribute. And the fact that this is such a tragic event, for a young child to be killed in such a cruel and vicious way. Why do you think the poet wants to take away? Most likely, there's a few things we can think about here. He wants us to think about the situation that the boy was in. He wants us just to realise how lucky we are that we've hopefully not gone through an event such as this, and he wants us to think about what we're doing, about the modernisation of the world. We're going to talk about the modernisation of the world is definitely being critiqued here, and what are the effects of that. The boy has to work for economic reasons. Okay, that's quite clear. The boy needs to be working, but what are the ultimate effects of that if children are going to die because of it? So a few notes. When the doctor comes, he naturally gives the boy anaesthetic to kill the pain. So the doctor is trying to help him with this adjective dark suggests finality. Okay, the boy is not going to escape from this darkness. It's not just putting him asleep to help him, it's putting him asleep to kill the pain, to let the boy die. Basically it's a palliative care step rather than a curative attempt. The ending of the poem happens quite rapidly. The doctor tries to save the boy, but his heart stops and he dies. When the watcher at the pulse description is left obscure, as it may be a doctor or could be the family member of the boy. We're unsure of who the watcher is, but we all know what the pulse means and the loss of pulse. And the pauses and silence play a huge role in the effectiveness of these lines. So we look at the punctuation and how many times we are made to stop. Each of these is reflecting what each of these times we're asking. He's drawing our attention to what's happening, making us concentrate and making us stop really, over analysing and just be in the moment. Give us that silence. We can't rush through this. We have to, really be within the moment. And so we could talk about the use of caesura here, and the effectiveness of those pauses. The little, less, nothing, and that ended it. The pause here, the reminiscent of dying heartbeat, and resemble our desperate hope. Each time we're like, oh, beat again, but it's just not going to. The final two lines of the poem were hugely tragic in that they resemble the definitive ending of the boy's existence. He's gone, but life continues on, and this is probably one of the most difficult parts of grief and death and loss, is that when someone goes, the rest of us have to continue with life, and that's what's happening with the boy. His family have to keep going and living, and that is one of the great cruelties of grief, is that life goes on despite tragic deaths. Okay, so there's quite a lot here now. I'm going to read through this quite quickly, but you should probably pause and take some notes yourselves. I'm just aware that the video is going on quite long. So the poem seems to critique the involvement of children in the adult world of work and the economic reality for the rural community that families cannot afford to allow their children to be children. But instead, both the boy and his sister, the sister is working here, she's wearing the apron, must work hard without even a half-hour escape. So he's critiquing the fact that children are having to work and are losing their childhood and the effects of that on them. There's the physical death of the child, but there's also the death of innocence and childhood by the fact that they were working before this. So they'd already been through a number of deaths, premature deaths, in the loss of their innocence and loss of their childhood before his actual premature death. There's a sense throughout the poem that something tragic is going to happen, and we're building tension throughout, over and over in this poem. As I've already pointed out, the boy's death could be symbolic of the death of innocence and childhood in a community where children cannot enjoy being young. There's a definite sense of fear around the mechanisation of farm work. Okay, so we're talking about a time when rural work and farm work is very much changing. So if we think back to the poem Tufts of Flowers, they were cutting grass with the sit, and he was out tossing the grass. It was like by hand. It was very much, human effort doing work. Here we have the mechanization of farm work coming in, and there's a definite fear around the effects of that and the dangers of that. Okay, this is a very straightforward poem. There's not a huge amount of overly metaphorical or flowery language. There is a respect to the details of an event, and rather than trying to make this, hugely political poem, Frost wants to just tell and pay homage to the boy to a real boy who has lost his life, and be respectful of that. But there is still, we can read a bit of critique and anger from the poet in the lines. There's a lack of description around emotions in the poem. Instead, there is a much more practical view of what has happened. Perhaps Frost wants us to be able to relate to our own emotions. He's not getting his emotion overly, he wants us to put our emotions in there, and doesn't want to force his feelings or force his perception of it on us, but we'll all come to a pretty much the same view of what's going on here. He is asking us somewhat to reflect upon the strains of rural life and economic pressures on human relationships, and there's very much a separateness here between the adults and the child. They don't seem connected, and maybe a loss of family life and loss again of human connection. Remember, Frost talks about human connection a lot. That seems to be lost here by the use of the words they and them when referring to adults. They seem very separate to their child rather than being a united family unit. The lack of emotional description could also be resemble the emptiness of grief, and this is one of the emotions that we go through when we grieve, and which these people are doing for this boy, and it's the emptiness, just the feeling of nothing within us as part of grief. In terms of talking about the technicalities of poetry within this, you should talk about the use of alliteration, assonance and onomatopoeia in the poem, mainly used in order to slow down the rhythm and draw our senses towards the threat of the band saw. So there's a lot of silences, there's a lot of pauses, and there's a lot of slowing down of rhythm to make us really concentrate on the sound of the saw at the beginning and then the tragedy at the end. So a few questions to take away. This is an incredibly tragic poem. Does the poet do anything in the opening lines to prepare us for what will happen? How is rural life portrayed in the poem? How would you describe the tone of the poem? Is it cruel? Is it emotionless? Is it practical? Is it sympathetic? What would you describe the tone of this poem here as being? Is the lack of emotion actually the most emotional way to write it, perhaps? And the final line stands out for its lack of emotion. Why do you think the poet has ended with this line? Why is there a complete lack of emotion at the end of the poem? Okay, so take those questions away, kind of think about them, come up with your own opinions and views on them.